anything like that, get on, get your votes in so we can get those numbers counted. And other than that, Sam, we're back to you.
Thank you, Jared. Is everyone going to survive another day? Awesome. Well, if you haven't picked one up already, I brought party favors. This is this year's Beekeeping Survival Guide. It's my little mini zine. It's this little handout I've been doing for 10 years now. It's probably the most important thing I've ever done. Rather than selling queens across the country, it's like I'd rather teach you how to do it yourself. So it's like a little bit about my little hive designs, and I do some real simple splits, and a little bit about beekeeping history in here. So help yourself. Feel free to make copies. For those of you in Zoom world who aren't here to pick one up, you can find it. Just go to Anarchy Apiaries Facebook. You can download it for free and then spread it around. You know, it's a fun little bit of information I did. So where were we? Talking about bees, I'm sure. Okay, we were up to here. We're doing these little skewers and building bees for pennies on the dollar. But so I started talking a little bit about the research that we've been doing that is, grant funded and pretty just trying to make things simpler like that, so more people can do it. You know, beekeeping can be very, very complicated. It can be really hard, and it can be a lot of work. And really, if you're on a big scale, it's something that you're either born into. It's something that's been running in your family for generations, or you do large-scale beekeeping because you like the challenge, or maybe you like to suffer, or it's a little bit of everything. But I always really like the challenge, the creativity, and bees are so versatile. They do so many different things, and I know if it all goes wrong, I can probably make a pretty good living just selling candles after I melt down all my hives. But yep. Oh, for my little beekeeping survival guide, just Google Anarchy Apiaries Facebook, and there's a link that you can download that for free right at the top of that. So, and it's fresh off the presses. So check it all out. All right. Well, we did some studies to look at these 2-day queen cells because I thought that it was really cool that they're so easy to ship. And we found that their quality was on par with 10-day queen cells, with the resulting queen quality. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we analyze that quality with lab results. But we got another grant after that one just to look at an even simpler method of just like walk-away splits, what we call it, with that idea of like taking a hive, busting it in half, and walking away. That's why we call it a walk-away split. Whatever side is queenless will build a queen in her absence, like that. So we want to say, like, well, what's the recipe? What does it take to make a good walk-away split? What gets your best mating percentage, your most your likelihood of success, and also a really good quality queen. So we're looking at the success rate and the quality like that of an emergency queen. So probably like almost every beekeeper, whether you buy queens or raise queens, at one time or another, you have made a walk-away split, whether you know it or not. Maybe you pinched the queen by accident. Maybe you thought the queen was in the box, but she wasn't, and they raised their own. You don't realize it till some time afterwards. But there are ways that we can do it in a controlled environment that seem to have more success than others. I won't get too much into all these details because you can find this stuff online. This is a grant supported by the SARE program, Sustainable Ag Research and Education. So we got some research I made over 500 little walk-away splits. And we tested, we wrote down variables for all these different conditions. We did 6 different volumes of hives from my little tiny baby nukes 4 cones that they are about 6 liters, all the way up to a single 10-frame deep, which is 42 liters. So there were 6 liters, 12 liters, 24 liters, 4-frame deeps, 2-frame deeps, 4-frame deeps, and 10-frame deeps. So we had all those different volumes. And on top of that, we monitored different population densities. So you might have a 2-frame deep, but if it's like really loaded with bees, that would be a high density population. Or we would put a 10-frame deep volume, but if it was a low density of bees, it might be the same amount of total population as that 2-frame deep. So we monitored the population density and also the volume of the box that went into. And then we went even further. We logged the age of the comb, newer wax versus older wax. We monitored the the age of the comb, we did the population density, the age of the brood. If we made the brood with like mostly eggs, mostly larvae, mostly open brood versus mostly capped brood. Then we did a whole bunch of different variables on how we made the splits. So some of these nukes, we just went there and we just stole the queen. We just caged her and let them raise their own queen in place. Sometimes we went to a bigger hive, made the split, and we moved the queenless split in the same yard. So they lose all their field bees, going back to the original position. Or sometimes we would move the queenless split to a different yard. And we even did some like confinement time experiments where we made a queenless split, sealed them in, and put them in a cold, dark space, like a basement, for 2 days to try to bond those young bees to that larva and induce a queen cell that way. And we came up with a couple factors. There was like many variables and permutations of these variables. So it's very like kind of messy data, but we saw like some trends. We can't say how significant each of these trends are, but they seem to be a launching point for further study about what makes a successful split. We found that the volume of the hive seemed to make no difference in mating success. So you can have a successful queen in a 6-liter box versus a 42-liter box. There was no difference that we saw, but we did see a difference in population density. Actually, we thought that the most densely packed nukes would have the most success, but that wasn't the case at all. It was actually the medium size density of the population density. And we figured that this may have been because of maybe they were raising multiple queen cells, and that first queen to emerge, rather than killing her sisters and going to mate, she would swarm. If they had enough bees and was too crowded, those are swarming conditions, and that virgin queen could have swarmed away rather than going to mate. Maybe the second queen to emerge wasn't as successful. Or we think that they also, like some of the smaller ones especially, didn't do well because they might have overheated. Like just too many bees in that box, less larval care, things like that, either of those. So we found that you don't really have to pack it in there. I'm in grafting mentality of those cell raisers that I showed earlier, bubbling out with bees. That's what I think of raising queens as, and I'll put 40 in there. But in these small boxes, we just needed one queen. It doesn't take a lot of worker bees just to raise one good queen cell like that. So you don't have to like really flood them with bees. And we found, especially at the smaller volumes, if you have too many bees in there, they weren't as successful. So we found like a good medium-sized volume, maybe the 12 liters, 24 liters, like a good 5-frame nuke seemed to be a good size. Yeah.
How do you define medium versus strong?
I made all the splits myself, so it was all in my head. Basically,
So like medium ones,
yeah,
a lot of bees, but not like packed, and the strong ones like
exactly.
Wall bees.
So yeah, the density was again relative to volume. So if we had like a 6-liter nuke, a tiny little baby nuke, but it was like had a lot of bees in it, it would probably have the same amount of bees as like a 10-frame deep, but with a small density. It's the same total population. You have to, we came up with a formula for the volume times the population density to have the total population. But the total population seemed insignificant. As long as there were about 2,000 worker bees in there more, the mating success was all the same. But that's 2,000 bees is really not a lot of bees. So it's like less than a pound of bees. So as long as you have that many, they were successful, and there's no difference in putting more than that in. But the way that I did it, basically a week one was about 50% full of that volume. So say you got a 5-frame nuke, if it's a weak one, a half full, if it's really strong, bees wall to wall there, and then the medium was kind of halfway in between there. Yeah.
So you're talking about
Right. So the question is this about successful mating versus like how many queens you can get? Like we're just trying to raise one queen here. We're not grafting into these. So we're either dequeening them or making a split that has no queen, but has the conditions that they need. They have open larvae and a little bit of food in there to give you. Yeah, the bees are doing all the work themselves. And so we wanted to do this research because this is something that anyone can do. You don't have to learn how to graft. You really just need one hive to do this with.
So what you're saying is, I've heard that the big hive does a better job raising the queen than small hive.
So the question was like,
That's not true.
does a bigger hive do a better job raising queen than a smaller hive? Our research doesn't show that. I think you just need at least 2,000 bees, and you need like good environmental conditions. You need good weather. They need to forage and things like that. And we found like It's a combination. It's like the bees need the resources, the recipe to build a queen. But what's the easiest that the beekeeper can do it? So it's convenient for someone with one hive, so they can become, well, like I was talking about, like I finished up with, this idea of all us raising queens in our backyard. Say you got 10 hives, in a bad year, you lose half your bees. Rather than buying queens from California or something, just take your losses and raise queens to replace your 5 hives from your best survivors. And you'll find instantly in that first generation, you'll have better wintering success like that, because you are localizing your bees. You are adapting them to your situation and the way that you want to keep your bees. Get a bunch of bees, run them through your system, plan on having some losses, but raise from your best survivors and don't bring any more foreign stock in. You'll find instantly the first generation, then ongoing, it'll get better and better, because these bees are changing to what kind of beekeeper you are and what kind of honey flows you have. So I see this as really the step to it, bring back local adaptation to our bees, and we're trying to make it simple so that anyone can do it, even with one single hive. And we started calling it, you can be a micro breeder in your backyard, even with one hive. You put micro in front of anything, it sounds a little bit easier and more approachable, but we can all be micro breeders in our backyard this way. And this is what we need, is locally adapted stock. Really, the hives that, the bees that like anticipate the honey flows, they build up at the right time before the honey flow so they can capitalize on that flow, rather than bees that just respond to the honey flow and build up too late. Bees that shut down at the right time so they can survive your winter, rather than brooding all winter long like those California Italian almond pollinating bees do. But if that's what you're doing too, still raising your own queens and breeding for almond pollination, it's going to improve your success and where you take your bees. So this is something for someone with one hive, but also for tens of thousands. Breeding your own queens that work in your system is going to make things easier for an operation of any scale. So, but we're trying to make it as simple as possible. So like someone even in their first year with one hive, who doesn't know how to find their queen, doesn't have another bee yard, doesn't know what they're doing at all. Maybe, hopefully you can light a smoker, but you can become a micro breeder even in your first season like that. And we can start turning around these bee problems. But having these local genetics and steering them that way is a part of doing this. So, so we saw that the density, just a median population, you don't have to overstuff them. The age of the comb made a big difference up here. So this is newer comb. We had 73% mating success, where older comb had only 56% mating success. And that was the comb that had the larva in it that the bees were building. And we think that's because the bees weren't able to sculpt the base of a queen cell. You make the hive queenless, that old dark comb, they like to widen the base of a queen cell. That way the larva can spin around in there and eat. They just eat like crazy. That royal jelly, once they choose a larva to become the queen, they start feeding extra royal jelly, and the consistency of the royal jelly changes. It has a higher sugar content in the royal jelly for queens than it does for workers. That higher sugar content is a stimulant for the larva, makes them eat even faster. They just spin, eat all day long. Thousands of visits from worker bees. But if they can't widen that cell base, I think it's harder for that larva to move. So I think that's why the newer comb, that they can widen that cell base, seems to make a big difference. And some people, rather than put a new comb, well, I'll go back to this one picture. You see how these new cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, this new comb, they can just make them anywhere. But I also find that in my bees, they also like to make them on the edges, like so. So that's where they can widen that cell base to be turn into a queen cell, make a nice cell like that, hopefully. But there's also some people who do use old comb, but they do a method called notching, or tearing down the cell wall. They'll pick a really young larva, and the comb can be really old, but if they just tear down the lower cell wall around that larva, that expands the cell base and gives the bees a start to make that cell. And there's Mel Disselkorn in Michigan. He's a really good beekeeper who's, he calls it OTS, which stands for on the spot. On the spot queen rearing is something you can look up, and he's got a great free book on it about this notching method. That's how he raises actually multiple queens per comb and uses old combs but tears down the cell wall. So it seems to help to either use brand new comb or do that notching, that on the spot queen rearing method. And we thought that was like one of the most significant differences we saw between new comb and old comb in our walkaway splits. like that. So brood age, as you figured, the ones with open brood, eggs, larvae, mixed brood did much better than ones with capped brood. All the ones that we started had some young brood, open brood that they could build a queen from, but we found that especially at moving splits in the same yard, a lot of bees fly back to the original position, but larva retains, there's these juvenile hormones in larva, and that keeps bees clinging to that larva. So I think the presence of young larvae just help keep the bees' morale up, to anthropomorphize them. Having young larvae just seem to retain the bees and seem to have increase their success of raising a queen cell and sending her on a mating flight. And then we did like a various moving scenarios. We moved them to a new yard, we moved them in the same yard, but to a new location, and then no move, we just dequeened the split in place. We thought the same yard, but a new location would be like significantly worse because of that flyback problem. You move a split, if it's queenless, you move it in the same yard, you're gonna lose a lot of bees. Sometimes you lose too many and the splits fail. You put a queenless hive, a little tiny thing in a new position, you have to make it pretty strong, or like most or sometimes all of your bees will just abandon ship and go back to where they used to live. So that's like something problematic if you only have one bee yard, you're not going to move it to a different yard, or you just don't want to dequeen the hive in place. But we came up with a recipe involving all of this data that's going to make it pretty easy for anyone to do this. And we started calling it not just a walkaway split, we called it a runaway split. Because, well, the conventional recipe, in my mind, of a walkaway split, you have a good, strong, say, double deep hive. You take one of the boxes and put it in a new position, new bottom board, in the same yard, you walk away, come check it in a month or so. This is a little more involved, the runaway split. What I started doing is picking up the whole hive, moving the whole hive to the new position, putting an empty box where that hive was. So the field bees, the older bees start flying back to this brand new empty box and then moving back the resources that they need in that parent position, the original place, to build a queen. And because we think that the younger comb is more successful and mostly larvae, we'll take a younger comb of larvae. So the runaway split, you're gonna move the whole hive to a new spot, place an empty box where the hive was, and then you're gonna move back a comb of larvae with the bees on it, but not the queen. The queen's gonna move as if they had swarmed. The queen moves to a new position. You're gonna move back a comb of empty larvae, a comb of young larvae, and you're gonna move back a comb of food, just so they have some instant resources to keep them going. So they get a comb of larvae, they get a comb of food, and they get those older field bees coming back. That also helps build a new brood nest. And that position that moves to the new yard, they have the older queen, just like a swarm, the older queen moves, and they have the bulk of the bees there. So some are going to fly back, but they're much less likely to fail because you're moving the bulk of the population to the new position. And this also equalizes the size and is avoiding the potential problem of having that first young queen raised swarming away. Because now in the original position, you're getting all the field bees and stuff, but they have plenty of room to draw a new comb. You can put foundation in there or empty skewers, whatever you do. And then the new position loses its field bees, so they're also cut back. So this is a great way to prevent swarming at that. And ideally you do it at the start of swarm season or when the bees tell you that they're ready to split. If they start making cells, it's time to do it right away. They're starting to swarm. So we start with one hive with the field force up here. We move it, we move back the resources, and we end up with the original position here, just a couple combs, comb of larvae, comb of food with the field bees. And the new position loses its field bees, but they still have their queen. And there's a lot of documentation that when bees lose their older, when a hive loses its older bees, that the young bees will start foraging early to recuperate. And so both sides here are gonna start to grow pretty quickly. And then this new position, the original position gets that brood break. They're busy raising a queen. You can check them in a month for success. Even 3 weeks, you might be laying there, but after a month, you might start to see some older larvae and even capped brood after 1 month is when we check them in this study. But the new position here, so you can either remove that queen once they recover, or you can remove the queen in the same motion. If you're doing this runaway split, if you see the queen, when I saw her, I would cage her and I would give both sides of the equation that brood break like that, or you can let this hive recover. and then split it again in a couple weeks after their brood emerges and they're strong again. And so you make 3 hives out of the original one, or you can just like throw some supers on them and like go put them into honey production. If they don't get that brood break, you are really going to want to monitor your mite levels, because if they're just consistently rearing brood all season, if they don't swarm and have no break, then your mite levels are likely going to get out of control. Unless you have like special magic genetics, and VSH is getting there, but not quite there 100%. But if you're consistently brood rearing all season long, you're also rearing mites all season long. That's why I say treatment free, but not stupid. You know. So this is a really easy recipe. And I actually started doing this since we did the study in 2020. I stopped moving my splits in between bee yards. And I know some even large scale commercial guys with thousands of hives, and they don't now they use this kind of method. You know, if they have a loss, they're going to move their hive within their yard onto another pallet where the loss was, move back some resources where the field forces is, and they'll use a grafted queen cell or a mated queen in a cage, or in some cases let them raise their own. You know, so this applies to large scale beekeeping also, not moving hives from yard to yard. It's just a heck of a lot less work. Like that. Yeah, question.
So how far are you moving your original hive?
Good question. It can actually be pretty close if you change the orientation. So I do like a lot of my bigger hives on pallets and stuff. They could be on the same pallet, just facing a different direction. Like the opposite direction is fine, because your field bees are still really are honed into that one location. But you can move 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, wherever you have space in your bee yard. So yeah, you got options in that regard. I wouldn't put them like 2 feet away with the entrance like oriented the same way. I give them some distance and things like that. So yeah, so like it's a real versatile way of splitting, whether you're going to let them raise their own or use a grafted cell or a mated queen. It's you can do this in any which way. So I stopped moving splits in between yards. And if you're interested in like weaning off of like chemical treatments, and it really makes sense to not be moving brood in between yards anymore. When you move brood, you are moving mites, you're moving viruses, you're moving all the pathogens and pesticides in that comb as well from yard to yard like that. So you can have each yard kind of self-contained, and each yard kind of develops its own gene pool that works for that yard specifically. That makes quite a bit of sense to kind of cull down this transmission of mites from yard to yard. So, and hopefully like, they'll raise some nice queen cells. I'll just let them do their thing. I don't really check them for a month until after that split is executed. So we gathered up a bunch of these queens. We sent about 50 of them from this study to David Tarpey's lab, Dr. Tarpey at North Carolina State University. He has the queen clinic, or we call it the queen machine. Here is a honeybee queen and disease clinic. He's been doing this for years, and over the years, I've sent him many samples of my queens. Queens started going for $40 for a queen in some cases. I wanted to make sure that they were good quality. So for years, I've been sending this lab queens, and they'll measure and weigh every part of the queen, like the width of her head or her weight, her thorax and her wings and stuff. And they'll grade for the morphometrics, just the size of the queen, but then they'll dissect the spermatheca. And they will tell you how many sperm are in the spermatheca, how well she mated, and then they'll actually stain the sperm, put it under a slide, and tell you the percentage of the sperm that is actually viable, like that. So, so you're in like a healthy environment for your mating yard. So you can compare different mating yards. This way you can compare different methods. But in this case, we wanted to see how good are these emergency queens. How do they stack up to grafted queens? Fortunately, there's a real stigma against emergency queens. Even emergency sounds like kind of like negative. I started using the word bee's choice queens, because the bees are choosing the larva in this case. And people always think, oh no, you can't let the bees raise their own. It'll be a junky queen. You should go buy something for $30 from California. It'll be much better. Leave the professionals to do the work. I don't think that's the case at all. And now we have some data to prove it. Because this is how like a lot of our emergency queens, this is over 2,000 some queens that the lab has ever received. And they've basically all from grafted queens from several queen producers across the country who want to test their quality like that. But these emergency queens are just as good. They fit here in the top end of the spectrum, except for that one. I don't know if she's an outlier, but so it's pretty clear. And I've done submissions of emergency queens before this study, and they've graded top notch. I think one came back with 13.3 million sperm, something that was like kind of off the charts. Anything around 5 million is considered average to good, but all of our emergency queens, just about, except that one, have graded over 5 million sperm, so they would have lived for years. The problem with the submissions, you don't get the queens back. But this is some of our most objective data of the study that we did that show that if you let the bees raise their own, these bees choice emergency queens can be very, very good quality and have high reproductive potential. Just about as good or maybe better than anything you would buy. Yeah, Jay.
Hey Sam, years ago, we used to have queens that would last for a long, long time. Like
Yeah.
you would replace them for 5 years. Now we're finding more and more that that's going down to almost yearly. In the research that you found, have you found anything that relates to the amount of sperm or what's causing that?
It's a combination of things, and David Tarpey's work has really focused on that because it is like cited as one of the biggest problems. Jared's question was, the queens used to live for years, and they don't seem to be anymore. We used to get like 5 productive years out of a queen, and I marked my own queens, and I've seen queens go 5 years, but it's pretty rare these days. But commercially, like buying these production queens, you're lucky if you get a year out of them. In Florida, our state department, who is taking surveys and stuff, the average is about 6 months productive lifespan before they are superseded. So a lot of it's the rearing conditions of raising too many queens per cell raiser, too many queens in one mating yard. They're not getting inseminated correctly, things like that. And it's a lot of the toxins in the environment. They kind of linked it to several things and haven't been able to really pinpoint any one thing. But the queen quality and the supersedure rates are a major problem in any kind of beekeeping on any scale. But I would really recommend looking at David Tarpey's work and then seeing some of his talks, because he's a brilliant queen guy.
And one more question for you along that same line. What about drones and their food?
Yeah. So one of the things about this report is that, yes, they tell you not only the sperm count in the queen, but the sperm viability. So this was like really good. 88.4 was considered alive. So these queens got an A for their insemination quality. And they give them an overall grade, you get an A or a B minus or things like that. So even if they do have a lot of sperm, if you're really down on insemination quality, that might be some sort of a chemical in the environment that's affecting the drones. The drones are a very, very important part of the equation like that. And naturally a hive would raise maybe 20% or more drones. And so queen producers kind of really care for the drones. The best queen producers make sure that there's ample drones. But in areas of California, where in Northern California, you have, they're raising tens of thousands of queens every week like that. And all these breeders are really kind of jammed into a small area up there. And it's, they raise as many drones as they can. And these guys are just trying to make a good product as fast as they can. And the demand is just huge and they can't meet the demand. It's really hard to it gets a little crazy just trying to find queens. My phone starts blowing up and people don't care what they are, how much they cost. They just need 200 last week. It's kind of the demand. I never thought it would be this crazy in the bee world, because I started before colony collapse hit the media and stuff. I thought I'd just be living alone like a hermit in the woods and stuff with a couple hives, sell honey at farmers markets. I never thought it would be the demand would be so huge. It's cool. It's great. I love it. It's great that beekeepers are getting so much support, but none of us can really meet the demand of the market, both on the hobbyist level and the commercial level for queens and bees and things. So it's tricky to have that balance of production, but also have a good quality queen and hive that you're putting out there.
So the genetics of that queen, of the offspring of that queen, what percentage of the genetics come from those 7 or 8 drones she mates with on her mating flight? She flies out, she carries the genetics of her, but what about the 7 or 8 drones she mates with over the next 3 days?
It's true. Okay, so the question is what about the genetics of the drones? So we can control by grafting off of a specific breeder, or even just a walkaway split. You're splitting your best survivor hive or something like that, but she's still gonna mate with anybody that's in the atmosphere. So like you have some like say like for example in California where most of the queens are produced, they'll say, oh, we have Russian queens that we'll sell you, or we have Saskatraz or something like that. They're all mated with Italian drones. So they might sell you a Saskatraz queen, but like, you know, she's really just half Saskatraz. And once she's supersedes, then it's going to be actually more Italian than Saskatraz left. So I mean, that gets pretty diluted very quickly because most commercial guys are raising more Italian drones that are better for almonds and production and splitting and turn all their food into brood all the time. You know, it's a little bit different than having a couple hives in your backyard that you want to keep alive with minimal inputs, minimal feeding. It's a totally different world than production beekeeping. And unfortunately, those production genetics are really just flooding the entire country like that and kind of diluting localized gene pools and making it harder to keep bees alive with like less feeding or less mite treatments like that. That's why it's so important that we all become these micro breeders. We can turn this thing around and make beekeeping easier again with less inputs. Less treatments, less feeding. I'm not saying no treatments or no feeding, but we can steer them away towards it being so much work. I mean, I really see that, you know, genetically, bees are becoming a lot like other livestock, like cows, hooked on supplemental feed, hooked on antibiotics and things like that. And I don't blame people for doing what they got to do, but bees are on the fringe of livestock. We're on the fringe of agriculture. Bees are still wild. They have this resilience. You know, they can survive without us for the most part, but that's quickly changing because they're quickly becoming hooked on these things. So like a lot of the gene pools out there aren't going to survive on their own, but we can make it easier if that's what our interests are in our beekeeping. And it's up to us. We're the beekeepers, and if we're doing even minimal selection, just doesn't have to be complicated. Just split your best hives. The ones like put them into your system, whether you treat, don't treat, doesn't matter. But maybe you like to make honey, just split your best honey producers and raise daughters from them. Just let them raise their own or graft off of your best couple or stuff like that. So if we were more doing this on a localized level, so I was trying to make it simpler so even someone with one hive can do it, we can start turning this thing around genetically and stop the importation of bees that are bringing novel viruses and things like that. And with Tropicalops mites coming down the road, who knows what's going to happen? You know, Varroa is not going to be the end all of our problems once we solve that. It's going to be, it's just going to be constant, more stuff. It's just like the rest of agriculture. But I think bees really have this wildness and this resilience that we can work with, and you know, I could send ripples through all the rest of farming and agriculture, like, you know, working with bees, empowering them to fix their own problems, because I think they're smart. I think they have the ability to solve problems, but genetics are a pretty key factor. But I'm also talking about, you know, the environment that they're in, being well nourished, and the management, this methodology, these brood breaks. So I talked a little bit about Varroa sensitive hygiene, controlling those genetics and stuff, and that's like a very focused program of inbreeding to augment mite resistance like that. And that's like just like one trait that you can use and incorporate. But I think local bees are really best. Some folks at lunch were asking me, like, what are the best bees? Like, should I get VSH? But I think locals is gonna be best, and it might not have the mite resistance that you may be looking for, but you know, combination of getting locally adapted stock that does well with the honey flows and gets ready for winter and can survive winter. A combination of that with brood breaks is that there's several tools that you can use to knock down Varroa. Maybe you will or won't have to treat, and not like making any magical claims about brood breaks and stuff, but it's a real good starting point to find how you can keep your bees alive. So there's a lot going on here, I know. So, okay, well, here she is. She's right here. Today is her birthday. She's right now caught in the act of slaughtering her sisters. It's high drama inside a beehive. I think she emerged from this one here. Actually, she's already killed this one, killed that one, and she's going for this one and stuff. And it's, you know, it happens every season like that. And it's actually part of how the bees do it and how, like, may the best one win. Hopefully, she's going to be a really nice queen that results. And this is something I just make the splits, I let them raise multiple, and it's first part of quality control. There's actually a really cool study that David Tarpey did again to prove that bees have a conscious, if you want to anthropomorphize, a conscious quality control. What he did is make a bunch of these walkaway splits, emergency queens, and then he caged half the cells. He put just a simple wire screen over half of the emergency cells, and the other half of the cells were not caged. So the bees could access half the cells, and they could chew them down if they wanted to. And they chewed down several of them, but the cells that were underneath cages, they couldn't chew down. And they were able to come to fruition and emerge. And so he got the weights of all the emerging virgin queens, from both the ones underneath the cage and the ones that could have been chewed down but weren't chewed down. And sure enough, the ones that the bees had access to, and they did chew down several of them, but several of them they didn't. The ones that they didn't chew down but could have were heavier queens than the ones that they didn't have access to. It's a real simple, kind of elegant study. It just used some pieces of wire and stuff, but it basically proves kind of a conscious quality control that the bees can somehow sense the size, maybe by the pheromones of that queen, and they will tear down inferior queen cells when left to their own devices. Like I said, it's almost like they know what they're doing. So it's kind of neat that, like, yeah, we like to say that bees know best, that bees can do it best. And we like to believe in that, but to have some like sound science behind it's pretty cool to see. So in simple studies. All right, well, I'm still like modifying my hive designs. I'm constantly experimenting. That's what I'm in it for. It keeps it super real, you know. I mean, yeah, I'm producing like lots of queens, but like my heart isn't like really just like doing experiments and teaching. I'll be doing some more writing and stuff, turning more of the production queen rearing over to like friends of mine. I'm mostly just rearing queens these days just to bail out my friends when they screw up. But tried a lot of these different hive designs. I like taking this box hive that I've come up with, extending the combs. These days I've actually doubled up the skewers and makes them a lot stronger. And a lot of this hive design comes from that old Greek top bar hive that I showed from the 1600s. And I was also inspired by the Warre book, Neil Warre's book, Beekeeping for All. Warre was a French beekeeper in the 1940s who wrote this book. And it's like a box hive, and he would only go visit the bees twice a year. In the spring, he would come and put empty boxes underneath the hive. And in the fall, he would come and cut off a top box where the honey was, you know. No matter what kind of hive you build, you know, the bees tend to keep their brood nest close to the entrance, and they keep their honey furthest from the entrance. I learned that in my top bar hives. I had the entrance on one end, so I had a kind of a brood side and a honey side, but it's the same in a vertical hive. Our Langstroth hives, you have the bottom board with the entrance down low, and that tends to be where the brood nest is, and the honey is up top. So these tall, skinny box hives, Warre was using as the bees would always be growing down like an eternal hollow tree. And you would remove the honey, and you're also removing the oldest comb. The bees would just constantly be growing down. He said, oh, let them swarm, supersede, don't touch them. That was his whole philosophy. And it's a beautiful philosophy, and the Warre hive, as it's been called, has gotten really popular. The problem is today's world is not the same as 1940s France. You know, we don't have the forage that we had. We have pesticide issues, we have mites and viruses, all these new problems. And so, yeah, 1940s France, yeah, just leave the bees alone, let them swarm. But these days, you know, the bees aren't even making enough food to feed themselves. Often, especially new hives in their first season, they don't store enough food. You have to supplement them. The only way you're going to know that is if you open up your hive and learn about their biology. And even more so, I really am a big advocate of learning bee biology, becoming a better beekeeper, and propagating your own stock. And you can accelerate it by grafting or accelerate just by doing these simple walk-away splits. It all involves like learning about your bees, learning how to handle them, learning how to move around them, and learning like when you can split and when you can get away with it, and keep trying new things. So I changed the methodology. I mean, like I was inspired by the Warre shape and design. I changed the dimensions. And now my boxes are just a simple 11 by 11. That's really the only dimension you need to know. This box is 11 by 11, and these 12-inch skewers sit on the top. Like that, and you can grow them as big as you want to. You get slightly more side attachments the bigger the comb is, but you can just cut those. Our hive tool is just a butter knife right now. So, and it's still faster than working a Langstroth hive. I put a canvas or a towel on top to seal this top layer, and people have told me I've completely changed the philosophy. I've changed the dimensions from the Warre hives. Stop calling them modified Warre hives, call them comfort hives. Well, I'm still like just getting over the pretentiousness of calling them comfort hives, but it's kind of their own thing. And it's so I recommend building these. They're really, really simple to make. No table saw. You can build them with hand tools. And really, people ask me, what is the best kind of hive? Is it a Kenyan top bar? Is it a comfort hive? Is it a skep, the old straw baskets? My answer is the best kind of hive is the hive that you build yourself. A lot of us keep bees for this personal connection or this connection to nature and stuff. You will like further that connection if you're building your own house. It's our job as beekeepers. We make houses for bees, you know? Yeah.
So when you do your skewers, do you use anything like a wax starter?
I don't, because I find, the question is, do I like dip these in wax or do any kind of starter? And I don't, because I find that the bees really do connect the wax to the skewers better than I can do. I can dip them in wax, but that wax can peel off a lot easier. What the bees will do is before they start building on these, they scrub them. They bite them, they almost sand them down before they attach their own wax. So if you want to start something like this, I would recommend like giving them a comb or two, cut out a comb, and you can use zip ties or something using rubber bands or zip ties actually work really well. Put a zip tie through the comb and zip tie them to these skewers. So you can get like a straight comb or two. And then just get at least one straight comb in there. You can give them some brood or some food or even just an empty comb and shake a package of bees. Then just shake some more bees in it with a queen. And you'll be off to a straight start that way. And I do like checkerboard. I'll put some empties in between the drawn ones. I really try not to checkerboard. Checkerboard meaning putting an empty in between the drawn combs. I try not to do that in the brood nest because it could chill the brood at the wrong time of year, but in between brood and the honey or in between the nectar combs, I'll put empties and that keeps them all nice and straight, and it's all that keeps them easy to work and things like that. So and I'm always simplifying these. My nukes I used to do screen bottoms so I could move them around a lot. I don't move these so much anymore, but so my favorite bottom for this is just like a 12 by 12 inch tile as the bottom board, or you can use plywood or anything you got. A towel on top works really well. And so I made these, I was using shorter skewers. I extended them all to 12 inches, doubling up the bamboo skewers like this. We can even use real bamboo. And like you notice my mantra is kind of like buy nothing. You know, in your beekeeping operation, you can get out of hand and you can go into debt real easy in this. But you can even just like harvest your own bamboo and cut that at 12 inches, splinter it down into these dowels, and they're plenty strong enough to hold these combs. It's really cool to grow all your own stuff for your bees. So, and these towels I started doing, I will let them propolis both sides of this towel inner cover. The tile sits on top of this towel. I get a bunch of propolis on these towels and then I throw them into a bucket of alcohol and I tincture out the propolis from the towels that way. And I sell propolis tincture like that. The towels get a little sticky. They're a little hard to peel up. So in the mating yards, I'm using canvas, kind of a thick canvas because it peels back really nice. And I also use some insulation above that, like the shiny bubble wrap, Reflectex, like water heater insulation. The more insulation on top, the better. You know, the warm moist air rises in the hive. If it hits a cold surface, that moisture will condense and drip back down on the bees. So if you're going to insulate any part of the hive, you do the top layer. And of course, all the boxes are rough cut. So the bees love to propolis on that. Propolis is like antiviral, not just for humans, but also for bees. It kind of sucks out toxins and pathogens. Propolis turns out to be vitally important. And of course, essentially bee breeding has been against propolis in the Langstroth frames, and we've just been screwing them up that way. But so I'm a big queen producer, sure, but we do make some honey. I try to avoid the honey. It's a real mess. I still mash the strain a lot, but I like to do fun honey experiments. So I try to do a couple of these. Oh, lost it. Yep. Bottom two. Okay. Does the first emerging queen kill the others before or after the mating flight? The first emerging queen will tend to do that first thing. Within a couple hours, she'll emerge. Queens are physiologically different than worker bees. Genetically, they're the same, but it's because of their diet of extra royal jelly they emerge. And so one of the differences between queens and workers, there's so many differences, but workers will not be able to sting when they first emerge. They have to harden for several days before they're actually at a stinging age. Queens are born from their queen cells ready to sting. Their sting is sharp and hard and ready to kill a sister. That's their biology. So within a couple hours, they're a little confused when they first emerge from the cell, but then they start searching and they start piping, doing the beep, 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 they're making these sounds. And even when they're still in their queen cells, you can hear them piping to each other and they're just like calling each other out to have a battle like that. So yeah, it's high drama. And so that's, it's what the first thing that the queen does. The first queen out will go seek out the other queen cells. She'll chew a hole in the side of the cell and sting through that hole and kill them. Or if they meet each other on a comb, they'll wrestle. It's death match for sure. Do you mix your own nutritious feed? I do feed sugar. You know, I've been able to stay off of mite treatments for in my operation, but I do feed sugar because these babies, they're either swarming or starving. I have thousands of little tiny hives. They don't have storage. They don't have a food pantry. They're either swarming or starving. It's a very narrow window in between that. So if we get bad weather for a week, these hives are so small that they can really start to starve like that. So I don't do any stimulative feeding like that because then all my bees would be swarming. I can barely keep up as it is. But in the fall, especially up north in cold climate where I winter bees in New York, you know, often our fall flow is failing. Our goldenrod doesn't really produce like it used to. Yeah, I'll mix a thick 2-to-1 syrup and put that on top. But it's really just for babies that are growing. I don't take all their honey and replace it with sugar syrup like that. So I harvest very little honey, and I don't harvest from every hive every year. The honey is more like coincidental. I mostly have to get it out of the way when I'm busting up hives in the spring. So that's where it comes from. But some years I made like quite a bit of honey. 2019 was a bumper year up north. I made about 4,000 pounds. So we do make some honey. We do a lot of comb honey and like higher end stuff, and we sell it all around New York and for top dollar. And but I do experiments like this. These were empty jars. Again, this is that shiny bubble wrap stuff. You cut some holes in the bubble wrap. Empty jars. I didn't even put any wax or anything in here. And this hive actually went queenless. I stole their queen. They had that a queenless cycle. And something about not only are they like chewing down their mites during this queenless cycle, it ups these hypopharyngeal glands, but they're also backfilling. If you time this right, and the bees are raising their own queen, you will find that bees can forage more because they'll go totally broodless by the time the new queen gets mated. That means they can drop their core temperature down. It doesn't have to be 93 degrees anymore in that brood nest. More bees can go out and forage because they don't have to stay home to tend the brood. They will backfill that brood nest. And then as soon as that new queen gets mated, and as soon as she lays her first couple of eggs, they will try to evacuate that nectar that's like clogging up the brood nest, and they'll throw it any which way. It's a great way to make comb honey. This way, Eugene Killian, the book Honey in the Comb, they took advantage of this by like crowding the bees down, having this queenless cycle of this backfilling and then rapid evacuation, throwing up into comb honey supers, or in this case, I just put empty ball jars up in here. They threw brand new wax and all the honey up in here, and that actually works pretty good, especially with that queenless cycle. So there is ways, if the timing's right and the nectar is there, you can make more honey from a queenless hive or a hive that's raising its queen than if they were maintaining a brood nest constantly through that peak honey flow. So, of course, like, don't blame me when it doesn't work, you know? So, we're moving towards the end here. As you can tell, I kind of have a different approach rather than production or getting all that I can out of my bees. I see it more as a dialogue with like the wild bees that are around me, and I just really want to be in a position where I can feel okay, like maybe walking away from a year and come back to my bee yard and they're still alive, you know? So I want these bees to be able to take care of themselves. It's kind of it's a whole different approach from what a lot of people do, but it's a lot of fun because these things are like hollow trees and stumps, and so I can manage them and manipulate them and get honey and get queens and extra bees as I need, but still like kind of like have a real appreciation for their wildness and doing it the way that they want to do and strengthening them rather than not only just for Varroa, but other pathogens, Tropicalaps, all these mites. More problems are going to be coming down the road. It's just constant problems. That's the way the world works. But having these bees be strong and adapted and following their life cycle rather than me telling them what to do, I think is the best bet we have. I'll be ready to like take a hit from the next big problem, the Asian mite or whatever that comes along, and know that I can break the brood cycle, use the bees' natural defenses when those things come. And they'll probably come to Florida first because everything seems to arrive there.
There was a question about no bottom boards. What do you do about that?
Well, my favorite bottom board is, okay, what do you use as bottom board now that you don't use screen bottoms? I like just a 12 by 12 inch tile. They're easy to find around, or pretty cheap, because they don't wick moisture into the hive. Any kind of wood or something's gonna rot out eventually. So like my lid is often an 18 by 18 inch tile. The bottom is now also a tile. So because yeah, the less moisture for winter especially, the better. So a nice permanent tile is pretty good. But like, yeah, again, like use what you got, you know, I've made bees out of old pallets and old scrap wood, I've made boxes, anything really works.
One other question.
Okay. Do you ever see the hive swarming when allowed to make multiple queens rather than deathmatch? Yeah, we certainly do. Often if a hive swarms once or still crowded, you'll get a secondary swarm. Actually, I think the majority of hives will, but and a good segue into this next little bit here. So that's one of the things that like our small boxes with a densely packed populations, I think one of the reasons they had less mating success is that the first queen out would swarm away rather than go on a mating flight. Maybe the second queen to emerge wasn't as successful for some reason. So yeah, when they're crowded, they can swarm away, but that runaway split recipe, and it is in my little beekeeping survival guide handout, it kind of knocks down the population on both sides. That seems to avoid a lot of that problem. But yeah, bees swarm. It's what they're always gonna do. It's how they propagate and live. And the more that we try to breed swarming out of them, the more problems we'll see with the hives failing to requeen when they need to, and things like that. A lot of our like a failure to supersede the queen when she's older, or things like that is because we're trying to suppress the swarming instinct, the queen rearing instinct in the bees. And of course, like for reduction, yeah, you don't want your bees to swarm. You want to like make the most honey because like you can't have everything going ruthless at different times, and trying to run a commercial operation like that where everything's all over the place can be very, very difficult just from a logical management setting. But you know, bees aren't logical. Love is not logical, only robots are logical as humans. So it's like, so kind of a different approach when we can work with this like kind of organic. Bees are just like swarming everywhere and doing their thing, but that's part of why they've survived for tens of millions of years. They send out lots of bees out there, sometimes at high loss, but there's always some that survive and propagate themselves. So that's always been my approach and how I've been mimicking what they do. And one thing I love is putting up swarm traps. It's such a cool way to get free bees. I mean, you just might catch your neighbor's California bees, but you can also get some cool bees coming out of the woods or some survivor stock that have been adapted to these conditions. And those are the bees that you can't buy anywhere. It's like your local survivors. So a lot of these statistics come from Dr. Tom Seeley at Cornell. He's an awesome bee researcher. You should read everything that he's ever written. But he's studied swarming behavior since the 70s. He says bees are looking for about a 10-gallon size cavity. You want to hang it off the ground, 6 feet okay, but 10 feet, 15 feet, even better off the ground. I put them in deer stands, I put them out of barn windows and balconies. They're looking for a hollow tree up there. So off the ground is pretty good. I put them in a shady spot. I tend to keep all my bees in the sun, like full sun. It's better for beetles and it seems better for wintering. They can move around better in the winter. But when hives swarm, the Seeley's shown that they are looking for a shady spot. It's probably to keep their combs from melting. When they start making those brand new combs, they get too hot, they would collapse. So that's probably an evolved decision that bees have to find a shady spot. So hang your bait hives up in the shade. Get them off the ground, about a 10-gallon size cavity, an entrance about 1.5 to 2 inches, like that. A 10 frame deep works great, but just reduce your entrance to about 2 inches or so. And also they don't like frames in those boxes too, because the scout bees actually will find this and they'll run around on the inside to actually measure the box. They actually have this internal ability to, in their brains, to actually determine how big the cavity is. And they will report back to the cluster that's hanging on a branch or something and do a dance. And the better spots get more dances, attracts more scouts who will do more dances till eventually all the scouts are dancing for one location. And if you put up the best location in the area, if you make it smell like a beehive, you'll have even more success. Tack in like an old piece of comb or using a used box is really good, or put propolis or wax in there. Also a little bit of lemongrass essential oil. Lemongrass has citral in it. It's part of the bee's Nasanov pheromone. That's their orientation pheromone. They smell that citral and love it. So lemongrass has citral. Just a couple drops of lemongrass essential oil or some fresh lemongrass will attract these scouts. And it's like fishing. You never know what you're gonna get, but it's like you can get some free bees and you can get some bees coming out of buildings or walls, like better than any bees you could possibly buy, bees that are adapted to your environment. This was a removal I did in upstate New York. This hive was huge. It was 9 feet tall. It was the old style studs, over about 2 feet wide, 9 feet tall. There was about 200 pounds of honey in this hive. And they were knocking down this old building and they said the bees had been there for 20 years. They never died out. They were super gentle. I was humble in front of these bees. These were like the bees of my dreams. I found the queen, I marked her, and I had her for another 2 years after doing this removal. I grafted off of her. She was so good, and her daughter seemed so good in wintering in New York that I started like sharing her. I let other beekeepers in the Northeast borrow her, graft off of her, incorporate. So these genes got around. These are really cool. You can't buy bees like this. It's really neat. And, you know, they weren't like great on mite resistance or anything, not superb, but they just could winter really well. So that local genetics plus like some brood breaks, like really like fit well in my operation. So I'm a big advocate of finding these cool survivor bees and seeing how they do for you. So, well, why are we doing this? It's a good question, right? I mean, these bees, like, I got to think, you know, it's like I'm a big advocate of like not living in an illusion that we're saving the bees, that this is some really I believe that this is a purposeful, meaningful work, but like to what ends, you know? Yeah, a lot of us are like, trying to make a living and do it with, you know, a degree of satisfaction. But like, how much longer is it gonna go the way that we're doing it? And like, who's gonna pick up the mantle? Who's gonna run my operation when I like, you know, can't bend over anymore or can't, you know, go through thousands of mating nukes and stuff? And who's gonna do it? And are they gonna want to? Is it gonna be fun for them? So a lot of like what I've shared with you today is about keeping beekeeping fun and retaining your sense of awe, your sense of wonder when you go out there every day, because that's why I'm doing all these experiments. And catch up with me next year. I'll probably be doing something completely different, like off the wall, just to keep it interesting, you know? And like, I believe in like a good job of like you know, setting off like several semi-loads of bees into almonds and everything runs like clockwork and a job well done. It's like, that's like really satisfying work. And also like catching thousands of queens in a season, really satisfying and stuff. But, you know, on a bottom level, it's gotta be like, it has to like drive us every day and also for the next generation. So I'm sure you all can remember the first time that you ever opened a beehive. It's a day that I'll never forget. I mean, I got really stung up, but it's like, was it just an amazing experience the first time you open a hive? It's like, it's something I'll never forget. And even if you only have one hive or haven't been doing this long, this is a gift that you can give now to someone else. You can give them their first honeybee experience. So consider bringing a young person out there, giving them that experience, because it'll be a connection to the natural world, a connection to that 6-mile radius that beehive is foraging in, that they didn't have before. You know, it really changed my life. I didn't even know that trees moved before I got into bees, you know? It changed the way I looked at the world and appreciated the landscape and the health and like just, you know, being part of something bigger than myself. So this is one of my favorite bee customers, and this was her later in the season, kind of taking the veil off. I mean, she would get stung. It didn't really bother her that much. She understood it's part of it and stuff, but just wanted to get like a deeper connection with something that's going on. So I really advocate, you know, sharing this experience, because if we don't, we're all going to end up as the lone beekeepers out in the crowd, and this whole amazing magical practice is going to die out with us. So I hope I gave you some cool ideas that you can try. I didn't get too much into like really like queen rearing specifics. I recommend reading all the books. You know, if you want to really go into queen production, grafting and stuff like that, really all the methods work like that. It's just figuring out what works for you, doing a lot of research. You want to become a better beekeeper, learn more about their biology. For sure, that's the message I want to give you, and keep trying new stuff to keep it interesting and give this drudgery of just moving boxes all the time and stuff. You can, you know, do some like nuanced things that kind of make it unique to you and who you are as a beekeeper and with your bees. But definitely like rearing queens is something I'm a big advocate of, and trying new things all the time. And I think I can take some questions and things like that. Is your handout zine available by download? Yeah, just Google Anarchy Apiaries Facebook. Someone started a Facebook page for me behind my back, and I guess you can't delete those if you just have to, they go dormant, but I did post it right there. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so yeah, that's a free download. Please like make copies, spread them out everywhere and stuff. And yeah, it's like a good little zine. Yeah. Yes, anything else? So, well, I'll show you a couple more highlights if I got them. Selections from my propolized mouse collection. Very nice. So, These are freaky. Some of my friends are really into it. Some of them like, just like the queen pupa cookies, all this kind of crazy stuff. Oh, this is my little pandemic project. I really like doing lectures and hanging out in person, visiting bee clubs, and none of that happened in 2020. So I'm so grateful that you all brought me out here today. But like late summer, I built this bee house. Awesome. I actually lived in one of my mating yards. I was catching rainwater with my water filters, had a couple solar panels I traded honey for, and I actually mounted a children's climbing dome onto the trailer I used to move bees with, this little 10-foot trailer, put canvas on it, painted it yellow, and maybe next time we'll roll through Utah, I'll bring this thing on out, and we want to do puppet shows out of here. It's gonna be great. So it's a traveling bee circus. Needed something to do. I got a beagle pup, that's BB, of course, and I crocheted her this little bee outfit and stuff. So she'll put me out here too. And so, yeah, in closing, Easter's on its way. Yeah, I think that's about all I got for spiel. Do you all have some questions? Yeah.
You asked if I could yes, but I want to go on better. So on the ESH or various point resistant traits and how heritable they are, how long that trait might last in generations.
Right.
My position to hear you talk a bit more about that. And also, from what I've read, that heritability can ramp pretty quick. That if you breed a lot of drones from that first generation, that it's the drones that carry the alleles for that genetic trait, and so that can help you.
It could, but like finding, so the question was specifically about some mite-resistant traits and their inheritability and how quickly do they run out once the bees outcross the things. Unfortunately, the queens can be mating with 20 or more drones on the mating flight, and if they aren't all have the trait that you are looking for, a VSH, Varroa-sensitive hygiene, isn't a breed or a genetic, it's a trait that is inheritable that they found. So they developed that trait by like using instrumental insemination, which is very, very difficult. I've never done it. So it has to be like super sterile. Only a handful of people in the country do it. But other people will find like an island, an isolated mating island, or like Kirk Webster, who I showed, who does Russian bee breeding. He goes halfway up a mountain where no other honeybees survive. And he hauls both his mating nukes and his drone producers up that mountain in Vermont, where there are no other honeybees. And that's how he controls isolated mating without having to do insemination. You got mountains here. You need some forage for the bees too. That's the trick. But talking about like breeding for specific traits, it's really a lot of inbreeding involved. When you just are selecting for one trait, you're throwing out a lot of other genetic material. And Varroa-sensitive hygiene is one of the most, probably the most inheritable trait of Varroa resistance that we've found so far, because the first generation is very good. So John Harbaugh, Dr. Harbaugh, who was at the USDA Baton Rouge lab and still sells inseminated queens, VSH queens, he says that if you raise a daughter from one of his breeder queens, which costs $300–400 a queen, if you raise a daughter, even if she mates with 0 VSH drones, just random run-of-the-mill drones with no VSH, that 50% of the alleles of that trait are enough to keep Varroa below a killing threshold, which is kind of a phenomenal trait like that. So highly inheritable. But then once she outcrosses again, then you're down to 25%, and then, yeah, you need to get a new inseminated breeder to raise a new queen. And so I think I mentioned yesterday, it's almost like buying hybridized seed, like hybridized corn seed, in the 50s. And so hybridized seed came around and everyone's corn yield doubled like that because the hybridized seed was so vigorous, but that seed was sterile. So suddenly farmers couldn't save their own seed. They had to start buying seed every year. So that's what I see as like buying these inseminated breeders. If you're gonna really rely on this one trait, you have to keep using it in your operation. And that Varroa-sensitive hygiene is just one trait. There's mite biting, there's an uncapping and then recapping behavior that kind of they're finding in some wild bees that no one's really come up with an assay for to breed for yet. They uncap and they don't remove the pupa. The bees will recap, and just that oxygen entering the cell makes the Varroa leave, or it messes up their reproduction rate, but it's not full Varroa-sensitive hygiene. It's a different mechanism. There's bees that go swarming is one of their mechanisms, of course. That's one of the main things of Russian bees. And Russian bees are also biters and stuff, like the biting mechanism seems a lot more recessive than the actual pupa removal of the VSH. And really, if you're just breeding for survivors, you don't have to have these assays and stuff like that. As long as you're not getting reinfested by mites in your neighborhood, if you're in an isolated pool and you can get, just survivors in do brood breaks and some of the mechanical things in addition to the genetics. Those are the best tools you can use like that. So I hope that answered that.
Your hive entrance on your 11 by 11
Mhm.
blocks, could you describe them?
Well, I was drilling like a 7/8 inch hole for that, and I had I was using those metal dividers, so I had a little nuke on each side. So I had an entrance here, and you can plug that. I was doing screen bombs because I was migrating with them up and down the East Coast for a bit, so I could plug them with a piece of foam or a wine cork. That's how my mother was supporting the bee operation. I'd go get all her wine corks. And so, yeah, so something I could easily plug and go on the road with. But like these days, I'm trying to make it even simpler, and like I'm calling that like the 1.0 when it's a Comfort Hive 1.0 when it's a single story. I showed you some of the 2.0s when they're 2 stories. That's a 12-inch deep comb, and I'm even doing some 3.0s, 18-inch long combs. You gotta be a little slower, a little more careful, a little more side attachments, but still you can pull them on out, work them. And those I don't really move that much. I can shake package bees and things out of them, but these 3.0 boxes, I'm not even drilling holes. I'm just like shoving a stick in between the boxes, making a wedge like that. It can be as simple as you want to make it. So I can just like shove a couple sticks in between 2 of the boxes, make an entrance like that. Yeah, but if you ever have to like seal them in or something like that, that makes it. Yeah, like a little entrance, and just like make all your boxes the same, so you can make those splits and put a similar box in its place and things like that. So yeah, lots of tricks. Then you can come up with your own methods too. Yep.
For your method of raising queens a
Mhm.
little bit, step by step a little bit.
Yeah, well, I showed you my weekly schedule, and like I said, this is my 19th year as a commercial beekeeper. I really consider myself a recovering commercial beekeeper because, yeah, I've changed a lot of over the years. But the queens, yeah, they drive my operation. That's how I make my income. 2020, I think I really peaked my numbers to 5,000 queens in 2020 for sale. So it's a lot of queens, and it's really fun. I tell people, oh, I have 2,000 hives, but they're all only this big. The question is, I could go into some more details of my queen operation. So I would really recommend like consider what your goals are, what you're breeding for. I like mite resistance and these like more minimal inputs. Not just mite resistance, but just like inputs, outputs. These permaculture ideas are what got me into bees. And like I said, I do feed a lot of sugar, but like 1 year I hit 10,000 pounds of sugar that I bought to buy my bees. I got into bees through permaculture and natural farming, and here I am buying 10,000 pounds of sugar just to feed the babies, And so how did it come to this? But it's like pretty necessary for these small hives. If you're gonna have mated queens, you need lots and lots of small hives. So and like since I reduced them down to like 80 cents a box, and I had 2 little baby nukes per box, about 40 cents a mating nuke. So like consider what your infrastructure is going to be, what your financial input's going to be, what your labor input's going to be, and what the results you're expecting. Matt did a great job yesterday about looking at inputs and outputs, about how to design a business. I wish I knew him 18 years ago. It would have helped, But it's also like a learning process, and you got to keep it fun and interesting, and you got to have some failures and successes. But queen rearing, I'm not really answering your question about the details, but it's like details are so nuanced from location to location, operation to operation, and for different goals and things. But so the bulk of my real queen production to produce thousands of queens simplified my system down to that 7-day program where every Monday we are boosting the cell raisers. The cell raisers are always queenless. They're queenless starter finishers, which means those boxes start the cells and finish them to fruition. So queenless starter finishers, they're boosted and grafted into on Mondays. On Tuesdays, we catch queens, we bank brood for next week's cell raisers, for next week's boost. On Wednesday, we finish catching that set, and on Thursday, we drop in the queen cells from the previous week. Those cells are 10 days old. They're going to emerge in another day or 2, and so they're ripe and ready to go. The nukes sit queenless for 1 to 2 days, and so I'm doing about 300 to 400 nukes a week. This year I'm a little downsized, maybe 250 a week, but generally 300-400 or so a week is what my peak was. And so I usually graft. It's really good if you're just getting the hang of this. The graft twice as many cells as you're hoping to wind up with, because things go wrong. Virgin queens show up in the cell raisers, kill all your cells, and you don't know where they came from, lots can go wrong. It's just it's a process of attrition and the whole thing. So you want graft, you're going to graft only so many of your grafts work. And then so many, even if they do work and are start like getting drawn down by the bees, then only a percentage of those make it to 10 days when they're ripe and ready to use. You put them into the mating nukes, only a percentage of the mating nukes actually accept the cells. And then the queens go out to mate, and only a percentage of those make it back from the mating flights. And then there's always like maybe a couple that aren't up to snuff. They aren't big enough, and everybody wants like the giant queen. So that's like, I'd rather sell something that the customer's happy with. So there's always some queens that don't make our standards and stuff. So every step is just attrition. You want to have like a good queen produced in the operation. So, but like for the nuances of like how to graft, several different ways of setting up cell raisers, I would really recommend Harry Laidlaw's book, Contemporary Queen Rearing. It's a small yellow book, and it's just there's so much information packed in that Laidlaw book. It's become like the standard. Anyone who wants to go into queens, I mean, I've just showed you what works for me here and what I've been working on, and like also new ideas that I'm pursuing and stuff. You can try some of these things, but like really what works for you in your backyard is going to be like specifically for you. So you won't know until you try some new stuff, and keep it interesting. Catch up with me next year, and I'll have some more information to share with you. So yeah, I hope that gave you a starting point. Yep.
So if you're mating nukes, your little boxes, how would you set like a brand new mating box that you didn't have comb, where you just would go put 4 cups of bees in a box and some skewers?
So the question is how to start one of these things if you have no combs or things like that. Yeah, just shaking the bees into the box might not go so well. They could just abscond, especially if it's a really tiny box like that. I would really try to get them some comb in there, even if you only have like a dead empty comb like that. Cut out a little square rectangle. I like using zip ties. You push that through the comb a little bit, zip tie it onto the skewer. So at least a comb or two, shake some bees and a mated queen in there, give them some food like that. If you can give them some brood, cut a little bit of square brood out from another hive, that's going to give you your best success rates. Or what I would do really is give them some comb, brood or honey or whatever you have in that, and put them in a position where they get the field force. So you say you have a Langstroth hive going, cut out a little bit of the brood, put it on the skewers, move your Langstroth hive, put the box hive where it was. So they get the field force and a little bit of brood. Brood will really keep them from the chance of absconding, especially if you're doing a really tiny hive. And you'll find I'm an advocate of feeding them because you'll get more comb a lot faster that way. And then you can take the combs that they draw and like convert some of your other hives. Like getting some brood going is really gets them off to a good start. Otherwise, if you give them just empty comb and some worker bees, it's going to be 3 weeks before they really start to expand. Meanwhile, the attrition, those older bees are dying off. You won't have any offspring coming up for a couple weeks, 3 weeks before that queen and there's first brood emerges. So you get them off to a good start so they can grow right away with whatever resources you can give them. But at least some wax comb if you can. But if you're doing like all you have is if you're brand new, don't have anything, or just doing a package or something like that. I still try to get some comb actually, but it will work. Just keep an eye on them. Maybe keep your queen caged for an extra day while they get used to that environment, and give them a bigger box. I would do maybe 2-3 of my boxes, maybe 12 inches to 18 inches deep. Shaking a 3-pound package into a 11 by 11 by 6 inch space, they're going to say that this is way too small. We're going to go look for something else. So anything you do to make it smell like a beehive. Also build some bait hives and put them up with that design and wax them, lemongrass, because you'll catch some swarms in those, because there's a lot of bees in the area. So yeah, that's another great way to start for free. Yes, sir.
You have a lot of YouTube videos.
I think I do.
Are you making money off YouTube?
I'm not. I rarely go on my computer. The question is like, do I have YouTube videos? Do I make money off of them? Like, no, I've actually never posted a single thing on YouTube. Other people have. Sometimes they ask my permission to. Often they don't. I think there's like how to build comfort hives and all kinds of things out there that aren't Anarchy Apiaries approved and stuff. But I really don't have a lot of free time because I am out in the field every day. I love. I mean, this is a vacation for me. It's awesome. It's snowing out. I don't think I'm going to be working these today. It's foreign, but it's like welcome to take a little break. But no, I'm out in the field like every day. That's where yeah, that's where I'm most at peace and stuff. Not I will. Sooner or later, get some like really like orchestrated beekeeping videos and stuff, and do some more writing. And beyond just that, I mean, I'm into the teaching rather than just like producing thousands and thousands of queens. I really would like to see more people doing it and like put myself out of a job, but that's okay. Fishing pole, you know. But we're doing a lot more just like to educate that. We've been on such a roll with the sustainable ag grants, doing these queen experiments, that we just got one to do a queen rearing school. It's going to be based in Massachusetts on my friend's land. You can find out about it at They Keep Bees LLC, theykeepbees.com. But it's going to be for people regional to the Northeast. It's an area of the country that's pretty difficult to overwinter bees these days. But it's going to be an intensive vocational queen rearing school. Where every student, we're going to take on 50 students this year coming up, everyone gets their own hive on site in Massachusetts on my friend's land. And we're going to like graft together, we're going to do walkaway splits, and everyone's going to split their own hive there into nukes. And then at the end of the summer, they get to take their nukes home or that. So we're going to try it this year and next year. We have grant money to do that. We're going to take surveys, see how it works, and hopefully it'll be something that we can replicate around the country. You get more queen rearers raising local adapted stock. So it's pretty fun. There's nothing like that in the country. In Europe, you have more journeyman, like apprenticeship programs to go into, doing this for a living. But here we have master beekeeper programs, so nothing is that hands-on or that intensive to make you go from 100 hives up to being like a full-time queen rearer. That's like our goals for it's a more advanced, intensive program. So I'll let you know how it goes. We'll see. We've got a lot in the works, so it's gonna be pretty fun. Yeah. Yep.
Do you ever use pollen patties in your self-starter finishers?
I have tried. The question is, do I use pollen patties in my cell starters or anywhere in the operation? I really don't these days. I have a lot of natural pollen in Florida. It's constant. And I find that the pollen really isn't that much of a problem anywhere that I keep bees and stuff. And it's like just like a hive beetle banquet often like that. I find that my bees really don't like them that much. Pollens, they've made a lot of improvement on the pollen substitutes. A lot of them are still just like soy or brewer's yeast, things like that. Once they like really break through and find like what the missing links are, because they can keep a hive alive on that stuff for like 1 or 2 brood cycles, and then there's some mineral deficiency. There's some limiting factor that they have not discovered yet. I mean, we can feed cows a complete artificial diet, or humans an artificial diet. We haven't figured out how to do it with bees yet. So it really isn't a substitute, it's just a supplement. You need real pollen. My queen operation is based on like real like natural conditions. And like anyone's beekeeping operation, we're really dependent on natural pollen. Pollen is like everything. So I really like hold off rearing queens, especially in the north, until that pollen flow is really on. And the best way to determine your pollen flow, other than seeing it coming into your hive, is how many drones they're raising. They will only start raising drones when pollen is abundant, like that. And so once you start seeing purple eye drone pupa, you can start thinking about like starting to gear up for grafting and raising queens like that. So the drones are a real good signifier of when your natural pollen is that. But yeah, pollen subs, if it really made a difference, I would like look into that because I'm fine with like feeding bees and stuff, but I just don't think they're really good enough for the expense and stuff. But again, I'm not trying to build a huge cluster in February to go to almonds anymore, things like that. And I could just like stay at home and like work with the bees pace a little bit more. So yeah, but like, it's all part of the budget when depending on what your goals are. Yep. Anybody else? Well, thank you all so much for having me. We're hanging out here a couple more days, and we're gonna check out the Salt Lake City a bit. And yeah, give me a holler, anarchyapiaries@hotmail.com, anarchyapiaries.org. And good luck with your bees this year. Hope you all do well.